Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Richard and welcome to this week's Stock Market Outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. As always, we'll run through the major indexes, the leading stocks in the market, then we'll talk about my watch list to see how it performed over the past week. They'll move on to sentiment from a few different sources like the put call ratio, the name exposure index, and then we'll kind of wrap things up with the IBD Big Picture article, and finally the GMI Signal from richardlmoglen.com. If you do enjoy this analysis, please go ahead and take the time right now to go ahead and tap that like button down below. It really helps me out and just takes a second out of your day. And with that said, let's get into the analysis of the major indexes. So to start things off, we had a strong push on Monday from both the NASDAQ Composite as well as the SP-500. A lot of leading names continue to break out and perform well, and we continued strong for the next 3 days, although we did have a little bit of stalling action on this Thursday, and also a lot of growth stock leaders did pull back and start to pull back on the 22nd this Friday. So right now, I want to see us kind of constructively drift lower on lower volume. We did see some high volume today on the NASDAQ Composite, but I think it'd be very constructive if these moving averages now turn into support and we start another uptrend and leg up towards all-time highs. Looking at the S&P 500, this looks very similar. We actually hit all-time highs on this Thursday, and you can see we're right at that level currently and above the 45,000 level. So once again, I want to see the moving averages shift to support if we do pull back on lighter volume, and I think that would be very constructive and set up a lot of nice setups for a potential new leg higher. So with that said, let's move on to the FFTY, the Innovator IBD 50 ETF. And you can see we had a strong push off the lows. A lot of growth stocks on the IBD 50 did very, very well this past week, starting with this Monday. And we have a little bit of an upside reversal here to end out the week. So I'll be watching this pivot here to see if we can finally break out and start to trend above the moving averages like we had basically in this period here. And also taking a look at the IWO, the Russell 2000 growth here. I want to see us start to trend again towards all-time highs, take out these pivots here, the 307.94, and also stick above that 300 level and the moving averages. And you can see we're right on the 200-day moving average. So we'll have to see whether this becomes resistance or if we can finally kind of move past that level and start to trend towards these all-time highs, which we really haven't challenged since February. And looking at IWM, the Russell 2000 is a little bit better than the IWO in general, closer to all-time highs here. And once again, we're potentially starting a trend above the 21 EMA like we saw back in this period. So I think if we can finally push through these pivots and into all-time highs, that would be very constructive for a lot of growth stocks and small caps in general. Now, I always like to check up on a few leaders to kind of get a sense of the institutional risk appetite here. AFRM, if we go to a weekly, looks pretty great. We're holding above these previous highs here. One consolidation inside week would not be bad at all, and it would kind of let all the moving averages catch up to price here. And going over to a daily, we had a nice basically support move off this previous all-time high, 146.9. So far acting really constructively. Didn't have a great close today, but did show relative strength versus a lot of growth names, which were down 2-3% on the day. So once again, some inside days, some inside bars, some consolidation, and then a push through 160. That is what I'm hoping for. Maybe getting an early entry to add to my position through a DTL, managing risk right at these swing lows. Looking at UPST, this is one I was pushed out over the course of the past week. I sold half on this day right here, a little bit more on this day, and then finally on this day I got pushed out of the rest of my position, starting back here. So overall a nice trade, and it is declining on below average volume, so I am watching for some type of undercut and reclaim through the pivot and basically another setup to emerge for this leading name. So at this moment, because I am a short-term trader, the trend is not really in my favor, so I'm waiting for some type of tightness setup to get back into this stock. Also taking a look at some recent IPOs, Bros is one that I've traded decently well entering on this day, and I've actually made an entire video about basically this stock and my trades. So if you want to check that out, the link will be popping up right now and below in the description. And what I really like very quickly is this dry up. Look at this dry up right here. This is really what you hope to see before a massive breakout, and you can enter through these DTLs here and basically a nice move and a lot of RS today as well, given that most growth stocks were down quite a bit today. So with that, we do want to discuss obviously Snap gapping down on earnings, and earnings, as I've said in the past, kind of give me a sense of the risk appetite of institutions. And so far, Tesla and Netflix have fared quite well, but Snap is kind of the first big downside mover here this earnings season. So we'll have to see whether this is the trend for the rest of the season, or if they end up more like Tesla or Netflix, recovering well, even though they initially saw some weakness. So for now, there's no touch for me. It's not set up. It's not a leading name. And you could use this as kind of a high volume close and see kind of how the base develops above and below this potential level. And it's interesting that it did stop pretty closely to the anchor view app from this day right here. If you've got that mapped up on TradingView or TC2000, I think that's always cool to see. But ideally, basically, to add to my conviction in the strength of the market, I want to see more gap ups than gap downs, and we'll just have to see how the rest of earnings season plays out. So that said, let's move on to TC2000 and go through the leaders list one by one and basically see how they're doing, whether they're trending near all-time highs or showing some signs of distribution. So first things first, Bros up almost 30% on the week. And once again, check out that video if you want a really extensive analysis of this stock and also kind of IPO bases in general, which really is the setup here, and really highlighting the anchor VWAP, kind of flattening out here, as well as the tightness and dry up on volume near the bottom of the base, kind of a hallmark of these IPO base setups. ASAN is one that I missed that is acting really well. You had a 3-hour break to the upside, also a wick setup here on this Tuesday, and really nice action today, well off the lows, recovering well off its lows, even though it was a down day on high volume. This to me shows supportive action, and I would love to see it kind of drift sideways down a little bit, let the 10 EMA here catch up, and then reconfirm to the upside. So ASAN looks really strong, definitely one of the leaders in the market, really since this gap up on earnings and the nice reconfirming breakout here on very high volume. You can see all this volume coming in as well. And moving on to coin, you can see it's pulling back a little bit the past 2 days, which is pretty normal given that it was up about 30% in just 5 days. I would like to have seen it kind of hold 300 at the lows and ideally close above this level, but it did close above 300 overall and above this pivot right here. Nice support bar on this day as well. So this in my mind is a potential leader. I have a position and we'll have to see whether this builds out, forms an inside week, and then pushes out towards these all-time highs. There is a lot of volume and overhead supply waiting at these levels. Moving on to net, this just keeps going up, trending above the moving averages. Not much to say. A little bit of a change in slope here, but I'm not one to short a very powerful momentum stock here, and this has a lot of fundamental catalysts as well behind it. Moving on to S, you can see a nice push off the lows here, retaking all the moving averages. A little bit V-shaped here, so I wouldn't mind some type of pullback back into the moving averages on lighter volume, and then for it to set up a nice constructive base below these highs, below around 73 or so. AMD, super strong action. Great move here as well, breaking through the double bottom pivot. You do have earnings coming up, but definitely semi stocks in general, AMD, NVIDIA are showing relative strength recently right now. And I wouldn't mind some consolidation and then a breakout, a gap up to new all-time highs on earnings. Moving on to Tesla, nice action after earnings here, reconfirming this on this Friday as well on really strong volume. And it's been a while since we've seen Tesla at all-time highs, but it's good to see. And we'll have to see whether this forms a handle, a high handle above these base pivots. DOCN, nice action on this day, a little bit of give back, but overall tight action on lower volume on this Friday. And once again, this is one of the leaders in the market, in my opinion, and it's holding that 10 EMA on a closing basis really nicely. Skin just kind of going sideways in a base. Definitely want to watch 2 squats here in a row. So I do want to see it kind of stick it and finally break out through these highs, but we'll basically have to see what happens next week. AFRM, I talked about, I like how it's holding this green line from that IPO, but one more week of sideways action would be very, very constructive, and then a potential breakout through 160. Zscaler, very strong. Cybersecurity in general is great. Crowd as well. Let's take a look at that chart. Moving out the right-hand side, and I'll actually talk about that in just a second here. Going back to Zscaler, this looks very strong. This, in my opinion, has been leading the past few months from this earnings gap up, and you can see it's back above all the key moving averages. Netflix, one of the leaders, especially in the big cap space, the mega cap space, really strong action here after earnings. And you can see it held this high volume close and never kind of closed below it again. And that really reconfirms the strength and the conviction of buyers. Domo, really nice action, potentially forming out a handle on lower volume. Definitely want to watch through this pivot right here. D-Dog, super strong, trending above the key moving averages into new all-time highs. Looks great. AMBA, a leader as well. Great action on this day right here. I actually had it here and then was stopped out this day. Never set alert again and just kind of let it go here, which is something I need to look back on and see what I could have done better in this process. NVIDIA, as I said, very strong as well. AMD's chart looks a little bit better, but this looks very strong as well. And the fundamentals on this name, especially given how large a company it is extremely, extremely impressive. CrowdStrike, as I mentioned, super strong off the bottom here. Wouldn't mind to handle some consolidation before pushing out towards all-time highs. MTDR pulling back into the 10 EMA looks pretty good, potentially set up for next week through these pivots. Team also acting well into new all-time highs, looks good. App super strong as well, especially since this gap up here, and you can see it broke out above all-time highs, but is a little bit wedgy on some high volume here. So we'll have to see whether this is kind of churning action, if it needs some type of consolidation. I wouldn't mind a dip to the 21 EMA. Nice action inside day to end out this week, holding the 10 EMA, looks set up for next week as well. In mode also going kind of quiet and tight, don't mind this action at all, and we'll have to see whether it can push out towards all-time highs. Mara pulling back into the 10 EMA, but looks like a constructive pullback, and you do see some distribution, some high volume here, but it was basically lower than this push upwards, and overall I wouldn't mind a handle before it tries to break out of this overall cup shape, which is pretty well defined as of this point off the 200-day moving average. Bill acting really nicely, going quiet and tight. MDB looks very similar. We'll have to see whether these can break out of their inside days here next week and try to break out towards all-time highs. LC drifting back into the 10 EMA, definitely looks set up for next week, looks really strong. SE pulling back on decently low volume, a little bit of volume today on this down day, but overall constructive action, holding the 10 EMA. Apps got slapped a little bit on this bar, but decent push off the lows, and it was kind of wedging upwards on lower volume for basically 3 weeks here. So this is kind of to be expected. Dash, you can see, is going pretty tight here on declining volume, and I want to see a push up and break out on very high volume. That would add to my conviction, and it looks really nice and set up here right below all-time highs. SPT pulling back, doesn't look too strong, and I would like to see us hold the 50-day and kind of reconfirm and push up the right-hand side of this base. AEHR going sideways here, definitely volatile recently, but it is pretty much holding the 10-day EMA, and we'll have to see whether this forms out a longer-term consolidation, sideways move, or just kind of pushes out and breaks out sometime next week. UPST pulling back to the anchor view out from this pivot, and is below the pivot as of this moment, so I'm kind of waiting for my spot here to get back in. I do think this is a pretty strong name, and once it gets going, as we can see here, it can really start to trend. HUT also pulling back here within the handle here below all-time highs, and I think that would be very constructive. Shake some kind of short-term holders out and then push out and try to break out to all-time highs. Task breaking below the 50-day. This did have an offering, and you can see all my anchor view apps here. But anyway, this is kind of no touch for me. Very high volume, just basically needs time to absorb that additional supply coming to market, and we'll have to see how this forms out a base. Finally, we've got SA, and you can see it had a gap down on earnings, but held this high volume close. Good push on this day, consolidation day, and then a little bit volatile today, but overall a nice move off the lows here. So in general, we had some very strong movers. Bros, ASAN, Coin lead the pack, and overall the leaders are acting well or just kind of pulling back on declining volume. So we'll have to see how they act next week. Moving on to my focus list, let's go through their charts right here. Bros was the top performer, up 30%. Always good to have one of those on your focus list and watch list. Coin as well was on there. AMD as well, acting super strong through this pivot right here. Skin, we discussed already, AFRM as well. Monday, setting up for next week. Good push and holding the 50-day moving average. This is a leading group at the moment. GDYN also looks set up here for next week, but pretty much went sideways, up about 4-5%. ZI just kind of going sideways at all-time highs. This could be set up, but I'm kind of avoiding the stock just because I've gotten chopped up so many times in the past. So obviously it will go ahead and rip next week to all-time highs. FSLR Solar was showing a lot of relative strength, but pretty much went sideways this past week. You could have bought it off the 21 EMA if you are a very aggressive trader here, but so far it's just an inside day to end out this week. EMPH looks a little bit better, pulling back into the 10-day. You do see some high volume here, so I would like ideally to see some type of tightness and dry up on volume before a push up towards these pivots around this area, 189 as well as 200. Weber, an IPO here, not doing too much. You can see it failed to pivot a few times at this moment. ABNB kind of breaking expectations here on Friday, but so far this move is on below volume. SI we talked about, and Snap we discussed as well, gapping down on earnings. And just to be clear, I never hold a position through earnings without a significant cushion, and I never just buy and hope thinking it will gap up, because obviously this is the other side of the equation. This can happen as well. So overall, that's a run through of my focus list, the stocks we didn't already cover in the leaders list. Burroughs, Coin, AMD, those are the top performers this week, and make sure you guys tune in tomorrow on Sunday for my next list of ideas. And I'm moving on to sentiment. Let's go ahead and start with my Twitter surveys. And we had a decrease in bullishness from 63.4% to now 47.2%. And it's good to see that drop. We are climbing a wall of worry at the moment, and we'll have to see what this value is next week. Looking at the name exposure next, we had an explosion here from 64.46 to 98. So this is a very high number. That does give me some pause, but we'll have to see what happens in the future. And moving on to the put call ratio, you can see we're still pretty low here at 0.63. So I would like to see some more fear come into the market, maybe on a stress test sometime next week. Although today was a good start, you can see a nice increase today. Looking at the bulls versus bears poll, we have an increase here, slight increase, but still we're very low, not very bullish at all, which once again is a good sign. We're not super exuberant at this moment. There still is a lot of worry in the market. So moving on to the IBD Big Picture article, the headline is techs fall, but these stock market signals offer a positive tone. They discussed the first distribution day on the NASDAQ since the new uptrend. I discussed Snap, which obviously dropped 27% as we saw due to disappointing Q3 sales and a weak outlook. Facebook, Twitter, other social media stocks also pulled back, and that kind of caused the overall market pullback as well, at least on the NASDAQ. They also discuss some few stocks down here. Jerome Powell's comments down here about inflation and Task and DVAX they mention as well. But overall, their current outlook is a confirmed uptrend with one distribution day on the NASDAQ. Moving on to the Wishing Wealth GMI Signal, you can see it's green since October 15th. We're back in a red, white, blue uptrend at this moment, and we had a GMI score of 6 out of 6 on this Thursday. So overall, like IBD, my current outlook is a confirmed uptrend, and what I'm doing personally in my account is kind of waiting for the spots in the leaders that I missed on the initial breakouts and pushes upwards towards all-time highs, and waiting for them to drift back in slowly to moving averages, support, where I can buy them with a good setup. But in my opinion, we're a little bit short-term extended on the indexes, even given today's pullback. So I wouldn't mind some type of consolidation, let the moving averages catch up to price, and then set up a new uptrend towards all-time highs. So overall, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you are new. And I'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.